My ex laughed at me until the Pentagon called me Madam General. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. I stared at it for a long time without touching it, the way you stare at something you know is going to cost you something before it gives you anything back. 15th Annual Westbrook High Reunion. You are cordially invited. My name is Nick Healy. And the last time I walked out of Westbrook, I was 17 years old, carrying a garbage bag of belongings, with a mother who had just been diagnosed with stage 2 cancer, a boyfriend who had just announced in front of 40 people that he was done with me, and a sister who had already started texting that same boyfriend before I even made it to the parking lot. 15 years later, I was a 2-star general in the United States Navy. I RSVP'd yes. I almost talked myself out of it 6 times between the RSVP and the actual night. My aide, Sergeant Torres, watched me stare at my dress whites hanging on the back of my office door for 3 days straight before he finally spoke up. "General Healy," he said carefully, "your leave starts at 1700 hours. Do you want me to arrange transport?" "I'll drive myself," I told him. He nodded once, the way good aides do when they disagree, but respect the chain of command enough to stay quiet. I had trained him well. I drove myself to Westbrook in silence, 3 hours on a highway cutting through the kind of flat Midwestern landscape that used to feel like a cage and now just felt like history. I kept the radio off. I had learned a long time ago that silence before a difficult mission was not weakness. It was preparation. Because make no mistake about what this was. This was a mission. The Westbrook Grand Hotel glittered from 2 blocks away. I could see the soft gold light spilling from the ballroom windows before I even pulled into the parking lot. Valets in red jackets moved between luxury cars. Women in cocktail dresses and men in blazers filed through the front entrance laughing, already warm from pre-dinner drinks, and the comfortable nostalgia of people whose lives had gone more or less the way they had planned. I sat in my car for exactly 2 minutes. Then I put on my white cap, checked my ribbons in the rearview mirror, and stepped out. The dress whites of a United States Navy 2-star general are not a subtle uniform. Double rows of gold buttons. Service ribbons spanning the chest like a map of everywhere I had been and everything I had survived. The rank insignia on my shoulders, quiet and absolute. I walked through the front entrance, and the room changed. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was the way a temperature drops before a storm, gradual and then undeniable. Heads turned. Conversations dipped. Eyes tracked from my face to my uniform and back again, recalculating, searching their memories for the girl they used to know and finding something they hadn't prepared themselves for. I picked up my name tag from the welcome table. Nick Healy, class of 2009. No rank, no title. Just the girl I used to be, printed in cheerful block letters and stuck to a lanyard. I put it on anyway. Claire found me before I even reached the bar. My sister had always had a radar for me, not out of affection, but out of competition. From the time we were children, she had needed to know where I was so she could position herself accordingly. She was 2 years older, blonder, and had inherited our father's easy charm and our mother's talent for making cruelty sound like humor. She looked stunning, I will give her that. A green silk dress that matched her eyes. Hair professionally blown out. A diamond on her left hand that caught the light every time she moved, which I suspected was intentional. Daniel stood 3 feet behind her, a glass of scotch in his hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't immediately name. I would name it later. It was guilt wearing the costume of indifference. "Nick," Claire pulled me into a hug that lasted exactly as long as a hug needs to last to look genuine without actually being genuine. She pulled back and held me at arm's length, her eyes doing what they had always done, scanning, assessing, filing information away. "Look at you." "Claire," I said. Her eyes moved to my uniform, slowly, deliberately, the way someone looks at something they have already decided to dismiss. "Nice dress," she said. The circle of people around her, 4 women and 2 men, all familiar faces from 15 years ago, laughed on cue. The way people laugh when someone with social power signals that laughing is the correct response. I smiled. "Thank you," I said pleasantly. "Yours too." She tilted her head, that smile sharpening at the edges. "Forgot to upgrade your name tag too." She gestured toward the lanyard around my neck, the cheerful block letters announcing nothing but my name and graduating class. More laughter, louder this time. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I noticed. I had been trained to notice things most people miss. "Some titles don't fit on name tags," I said and walked away. Dinner passed the way these things do, a blur of catered chicken, open bar, and the peculiar theater of people performing the best versions of their last 15 years for an audience that knew all their original drafts. I watched it from my table with the practiced calm of someone who had sat in situation rooms while missiles were in the air. The high school reunion, by comparison, had a low threat level. Daniel sat 2 tables away. I could feel him looking at me every few minutes with the regularity of someone checking a wound to see if it had healed. It had. Completely, years ago. That was the thing he couldn't seem to accept. Not that I had moved on, but that I had moved on so far that I genuinely couldn't find the place where the wound had been. I had been deployed to 4 combat zones. I had commanded 3,000 personnel. I had briefed the Secretary of Defense and testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. I had held a dying soldier's hand in a field hospital in the dark and promised him his family would be taken care of. Daniel Mercer and his Scotch glass and his guilt-colored indifference did not register on any instrument I owned. Claire gave a speech during the after-dinner program. It was well-crafted and funny and warmly received. She thanked the reunion committee, made a few self-deprecating jokes about aging, and sat back down to applause while Daniel squeezed her hand and smiled at her with the performance of a man who had made his choices and was determined to stand by them regardless of the cost. I applauded too. Then I checked my watch. 9:44 p.m. 3 more hours, and I could leave with my conscience clean and my mission complete. I heard it at 9:47 p.m. A sound that doesn't belong in a hotel ballroom. Low at first, almost mistakable for something else, a truck outside, a bass note from a distant speaker, then building. Rhythmic and unmistakable and absolutely certain of itself. The chandelier crystals trembled. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Every head in the room turned toward the tall windows overlooking the hotel courtyard, where the manicured hedges and decorative fountain were now bathed in the white-blue light of a military helicopter, descending with the kind of deliberate, unhurried authority that does not ask for permission. It touched down at 9:48 p.m. The ballroom had gone completely silent. The double doors at the far end of the room opened 30 seconds later. A young officer in service dress blues stepped through, his posture immaculate, his eyes scanning the room with the trained efficiency of someone who has learned to locate their objective quickly and without drama. His eyes found me. He crossed the room in 12 steps, came to attention in front of my table, and spoke in the clear, carrying voice of someone who has never once been embarrassed by the words coming out of his mouth. "Madam General, I apologize for the interruption. The Pentagon needs you. Secretary Harmon is requesting your presence for an emergency Joint Chiefs briefing. We have a 2-hour window." The silence in that room was the loudest thing I had heard in years. I stood up unhurried, straightened my cap, picked up my clutch. I looked at Claire. She had gone completely pale, the green silk of her dress suddenly making her look less like a woman in command of her world, and more like someone standing in a place she didn't fully understand, watching a door open onto a room she had never known existed. I looked at Daniel. He was frozen in his chair. The Scotch glass in his hand tilted slightly, and I watched a small wave of amber liquid lap against the rim without spilling. His face had the specific expression of a man recalculating 15 years of assumptions all at once and finding the math catastrophically wrong. I looked at the circle of people who had laughed at my name tag. Not one of them made a sound. I turned back to the young officer. "Thank you, Lieutenant," I said. "I'll follow you out." We walked through that silent ballroom together, my dress whites catching the chandelier light with every step. The sound of my heels on the marble floor the only sound in the room, until we pushed through the double doors, and I felt the night air hit my face. The helicopter blades were still turning. I stopped just outside the doors, turned back once, and looked through the glass at the room I was leaving behind. At the white linen tables and the half-empty champagne glasses, and the faces of people who had spent 15 years believing that the story they told about me was true. I had never needed them to believe a different one. I had simply gone out and lived it anyway. I turned back to the helicopter and walked forward without looking back again, because that is what you do when you have already won. You don't perform the victory. You don't wait for the applause. You simply move to the next mission with the same quiet discipline that brought you to this one. The helicopter lifted at 9:53 p.m. Below me, the lights of Westbrook shrank to something small and distant and completely powerless to define me. They always had been. I had just needed to come back one more time to finally know it all the way down to the bone. If this story moved you, if you have ever been underestimated, dismissed, or laughed at by people who had no idea what you were quietly becoming, then share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Because the most powerful response to anyone who has ever doubted you is not an argument. It is a helicopter. It is a life so undeniably, unapologetically built on your own terms that the room goes silent without you saying a single word. Nick Healy didn't go back to prove anything. She went back to close a chapter. The Pentagon called because the next one was already waiting. Your chapter is waiting too. Keep building. Keep going. The helicopter is coming. Share this if you believe in rising quietly and arriving loudly.